Welcome back to the last part of Chapter 28. We're going to start with Mexican art. The Mexican Revolution started in 1910 with the overthrow of the dictator General Diaz and ended in 1921 with the reformist government of Alvaro Obregón. Diego Rivera is well known as a Mexican muralist. He focuses in on the common man. He is a communist during this time. He also did several murals in the U.S. He started working under FDR's New Deal, completing several public murals, including the lobby of the RCA building in Rockefeller Center. It was called Man at the Crossroads, Looking with Hope and High Vision to a New and Better Future. However, Rivera's mural included a portrait of Lenin, and the Rockefellers decided to destroy the mural. So, Rivera went back to Mexico and remade it as Man, Controller of the Universe. This is for Museo del Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. The focus of this mural is on science as well as communism. So, in the center, we have this man, controller of the universe, as we see. He is underneath a telescope, but we have both the telescope and microscope here. So we have macro and micro, and we see that in these two discs. So this is the macro. This is the universe that we would see in the telescope. And then we have the micro. This is the universe of cells and microscopic organisms that we would see in the microscope. We see the connection to the earth here and all of the produce that is being grown. And on this side, we have Lenin over here, and he is holding hands with different races. So the idea is that he is unifying labor. We'll notice that we have this very unified army over here on this side. So we have some of the evils of capitalism being shown here. That includes a bar with the bourgeoisie, including John D. Rockefeller. We also have, in this background here, we have some protesting laborers. We've got the police coming after them. So we have this idea that there's a lot of problems with capitalism. Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. So Frida was in a horrific traffic accident when she was 18. She broke her spine, her collarbone, pelvis, pierced her uterus, and this actually caused her pain and suffering for the rest of her life. She's very interested in the folk style and in ex votos. An ex voto is something you see throughout Mexico and Central America and South America. And this has to do with the Catholic Church, and these are created by everyday people as a way of giving thanks for a miracle or something good or blessing that has happened in their life. So they would paint a little scene, and then they would write the description there at the bottom. Her paintings are very personal. She is oftentimes referred to as a surrealist painter. André Breton announced that she was. However, she always said that she was not, because she said that her paintings had nothing to do with dreams. They were her reality. Frida Kahlo married Diego Rivera in 1929. She found out that he was cheating on her with her younger sister Christina and divorced in 1939. They ended up remarrying a year later. So we see in this piece, we see the two sides of her. We see the European side of her here. This has to do with her father's Hungarian Jewish ancestry in German. And then we have on the right side, we have her traditional native side. This has to do with her mother's Indian and Creole ancestry. So we see the split sides of her personality. These two sides are connected by hearts and one blood vessel. You'll also see that there's something that she's holding right there. This is a miniature portrait of Rivera as a boy. And so the idea is that she's having to cut off that part of her, the part that loves Rivera. We have 143 known paintings by Kahlo, 55 of which were self-portrait. There's a few other pieces by her, including a couple of photographs of her, as you can see. She became very ill the last years of her life and ended up being confined to her bed. But she actually painted while laying in bed. The painting here in the corner has to do with, as I said, her accident pierced her uterus, and so she was never able to have children, something that really bothered her the rest of her life. And this is one I thought you would find interesting, because here Frida is painting the two Fridas there. And this has a lot to do with, again, the fact that she had to continue to wear back braces and was constantly in pain. She died at the age of 47. October 1929. As we all know, that is when the New York stock market crashed, heralding the beginning of the Great Depression. This is also heralding a very scary time for the rest of Europe. Hitler became chancellor in 1933, closed the Baja in the same year. He created the Degenerate Art exhibit in Munich in 1937. So we have Hitler in Germany, we have Mussolini in Italy, we have Hirohito in Japan, and Communist Russia has now become a totalitarian regime under Stalin. So that's the backdrop of the rest of these pieces. Edward Hopper, Early Sunday Morning. So you will see that in a lot of Hopper's paintings we have the idea of emptiness, quiet, loneliness. So the idea is that this is a typical Main Street USA early on a Sunday morning, so there's no one around. But you'll notice that there's no sign of life whatsoever. There's no dogs, there's no birds, there's no plants, there is nothing living in this entire piece. Not only that, while this is very much a typical Main Street USA, there's also nothing individual. You'll notice that the apartments up here on the second level, which is what these would have been, these are all very uniform. There's nothing very unique about them. One of them doesn't have frilly lace curtains or bright red curtains or anything to stick out. It's all very quiet, lonely, isolated. You also notice that Hopper likes to use very theatrical lighting. It's a little more subtle than, say, the Baroque, but it's still pretty theatrical. So, of course, Nighthawks is one that you're probably very familiar with. So this one we do have people. But if you notice, people really aren't interacting. There's a few people, again, very isolated. But the only people here that might be interacting is the gentleman who's serving them. Other than that, this couple, they're not speaking to each other. They're not looking at each other. And this gentleman is off to the side. And there's no one outside of this diner. It is quiet, isolated, empty. You think, well, those are just two pieces, so I had to include this one as well. This is, looks like maybe a husband and wife in the living room. He's reading the paper, and she is listening to something, maybe the radio. But the body language says that they are not interacting. Walker Evans, Graveyard, Houses, and Steel Mill, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So as I said, we have the Great Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt helped shepherd in many different programs to help pull us out of the Great Depression, including the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration, and the Federal Art Project. The Federal Art Project hired 5,000 artists and paid them $25 to $35 a week to create art. The Farm Security Administration hired 20 different photographers to record conditions of the poor. Under the Works Progress Administration, not only did some public buildings and some roads and things like that get built, but murals were created for schools, libraries, post offices, and hospitals. Walker Evans was one of the first photographers hired by the Farm Security Administration in 1935. However, he was fired 2 years later because he did not make images that portrayed how bad the conditions were in America. They were very subtle, they were very artistic, and not really the focus that they were wanting. So we have this intimate portrait of a town here, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Obviously a working class area. We are in the cemetery, kind of looking down on the city. We've got the telephone poles, we have the factory in the midground, we have the rest of the city in the back. Dorothea Lange is probably the artist we're most familiar with from the Farm Security Administration. Dorothea had polio as a child, and that left her with a limp. The reason why I point that out is because she is going to some very remote areas, and so she's actually having to haul her equipment. Again, cameras weren't just things that popped in your pocket back then. It was a lot of equipment and stuff you had to carry with you. She trained in New York City, then moved to California. She married the painter Maynard Dixon. They ended up having 2 children and getting divorced. She married Paul Taylor in 1935, who was an economist at the University of California at Berkeley. And Paul actually ended up going out with her at some of these locations to help carry some of her equipment. So this is probably the most famous of her photographs. This is Migrant Mother. This is a photograph of Florence Thompson, who was 32 at the time, and mother of 7. She had just sold tires off of their truck to buy food. This was at one of the migrant farm camps out in California. People were going from farm to farm, picking crops, and then moving on in order to get some wages. This was a very powerful photograph, and this ended up spurring economic help. The government ended up sending food to California, to the relief camps for migrant workers. Another thing to know is that Dorothea Lange, as well as all the rest of the artists working for the Farm Security Administration, they did not own their copyright. So Dorothea Lange did not actually make any money off of this photo. This photo, even though it's been reprinted thousands, if not millions of times, it was owned, the copyright was owned by the FSA. Something very important for you guys to know as you're entering the work world is who owns copyright of the artwork that you create. A couple of other things. The backstory of this piece, the reason why the 2 children have their heads turned, don't have anything to do with how sad they are. It actually has to do with the fact that they kept smiling for the camera. Something natural for children to do. They were smiling for the camera, which seemed a little too happy. So she asked that they turn their heads this way. That makes them look distraught. So this is a staged photograph in some respects. It's also just one of several photographs that she took that day. So here are a few others. So we've got the famous one here, but you can see that she took several of her nursing her young child, some of the other children entering in the photos. So the question here is this photograph as impactful, more or less impactful than the one that is so famous? John Hartfield. As in the Middle Ages, so in the Third Reich. This is the time that Hitler is gaining power in Germany. Hartfield started out in the Berlin Dada movement, very much interested in photomontage. And so we have him collaging these 2 images together. On the bottom we have the Nazi swastika, and we have a person who has been crucified on the swastika. There's a dead body. The top image is actually from a cathedral, It's a Gothic image of a figure of humanity who is being punished for his sins on the wheel of divine judgment. So this has a pretty simple meaning here. The idea is that the Nazis have transported them back to the Dark Ages. Pablo Picasso, Guernica. In 1936, there was a civil war in Spain. Conservatives, loyal to the king, under Franco, who's a nationalist, tried to overthrow the popularly elected leftist or Republican government. Hitler and Mussolini supported the nationalists. Because some of these terms are a little bit odd, the quote Republican, it has nothing to do with the U.S. Republican movement. These Republicans are actually, as I said, leftists, so they were communists or socialists. April 26, 1937. Hitler's Nazis, under orders by Franco, used saturation bombing to attack the undefended Basque town of Guernica on Market Day, killing thousands of civilians. Out of the 7,000 inhabitants of Guernica, 1,654 were killed, 889 injured. This outraged Picasso, and so he painted this painting in response. First off, this is a huge painting. It measures 11.5 feet high, 25.5 feet wide. This is huge. You'll also notice that he paints it in black and white. There's no color. He exhibited this as a protest at the Spanish Republican Pavilion in 1937 at the Paris International Exhibition. It only took him 1 month to paint this huge painting. So let's see what all we have here. As you can see, there is a lot of death and pain going on. Over here we have a Madonna and Child. However, it's like the Pietà that we have the mother and holding her dead child. We've got this woman here, and she's holding a lamp out. The idea is that she's almost like a Statue of Liberty figure, the light being enlightenment, freedom. We have a dead soldier here grasping still his sword. We have this bull. He's using his cubist style. So this is a bull, and a bull is very much a symbol of Spain. We also have this dying horse over here, representing people's agony. We have this figure over here, 2 hands up, almost like a crucifixion, or like Goya's 3rd of May, 1808. You'll also notice that this figure seems to almost be surrounded by these flames licking around. And then we have this light bulb, and the light shining around it almost makes it look like there's an eye. Kind of the all-seeing eye of God. Or the idea that the rest of the world sees the horrors that are happening and they can't get away with it.